my firm foundation, the rock on which I stand when everything around me is shaking. And I've never been more glad that I put my faith in Jesus, 'cause He's never let me down. He's faithful through generations. Yes, He is. So why would He fail? Now, come on, say it. He won't. Hey, He won't. I've still got joy. I've still got joy in chaos. I've got peace that makes no sense. So I won't be going under. I'm not held by my own strength, 'cause I built my life on Jesus. Yes, we have. And He's never let me down. He's faithful in every season. So why would He fail now? He won't. Hey, He won't. He won't fail. He won't fail. He won't. No, 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 no. He won't. He won't fail. He won't fail. You guys ready for this? Come on. Christ is my firm foundation. Woo! The rock on which I stand when everything around me is shaking. Hey, and I've never been more glad that I put my faith in Jesus. He's never let me down. He's faithful through generations. So why would He fail? Come on, sing it. He won't. Hey, He won't. He won't fail. He won't fail. Oh, trust is in you, God. Come on, proclaim this over your life. Rain came, wind blew, my house was built on you, and I'm safe with you. I'm gonna make it. Do you guys believe that this morning? Rain came, wind blew, my house was built on. Come on, you're safe with Him, and I'm safe with you. I'm gonna make it. Come on, we're gonna sing it again. Rain came, wind blew, my house was built on. Oh, I'm safe with you. I'm gonna make it through. Oh, and I'm gonna make it through, 'cause I'm standing strong on you. I'm gonna There's nothing that can stop the name of our God. Even death itself couldn't stop him. Come on. Death could not hold you. The veil tore before you. Woo! Silence the boast of sin and grave. The heavens are roaring, yes, the praise of your glory. For you are raised to life. There's nothing that compares. You have no rival. You have no equal. Now and forever, God, you reign. Yours is the kingdom. Yours is the glory. Yours is the name above all names. What a powerful name it is. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a powerful name it is. Nothing can stand against. What a powerful name it is. The name of. Come on, one more time, everything you got. You have no rival. You have no equal. Now and forever, God, you reign. Yours is the kingdom. Yours is the glory. Yours is the name above all names. What a powerful name it is. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a powerful name it is. Nothing can stand against. What a powerful name it is. The name. And what a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus. You're worthy of it all. Come on, sing this with me, all the saints. All the saints, they bow down. And all the saints and angels, they bow before your throne. And all the elders cast their crowns before the Lamb of God and sing, you're worthy of it all. You're worthy of it all. Oh, for from you are all things, and to you are all things. You deserve the glory. Oh, lift up your voice. We sing, oh, and oh, pray that our worship in this moment would be like a fresh incense to you, that would be pleasing to your heart, that it would be pure, that it would be righteous. Because God, we choose in this moment to surrender to you, to submit to your authority, and do nothing other than praise your name. Day and night, night and day, let incense rise. Day and night, night and day, let incense rise. Day and night, night and day, let incense rise. Day and night, night and day, let incense rise. Let your worship rise. Day and night, night and day, let incense rise. Day and night, night and day, let incense rise. Day and night, night and day, let incense rise. Oh, day and night, night and day, you're worthy of it all. Yes, you are. You're worthy of it all. You and you alone. For from you are all things. Come on. Into you are all things. And you deserve the glory, the glory. You're worthy of it all. Yes, you are. You're worthy of it all. For from you are all things, and to you are all things, and you deserve the glory.
Well, good morning, Rock Island. How you doing? You guys doing good? Hey, I am so glad that you are here. I want to welcome you who are here in person, those of you who are checking us out online or on TV. I am just so grateful for all of you. I am so grateful. I've had the privilege of running back and forth today, and so I've been able to worship with both campuses, and I got to tell you that last song, the image of being in the throne room of God with all of you lifting our voices up, it brought tears to my eyes in both the 9 and the 10 o'clock services. Just this idea of being with my spiritual family and having a taste of what heaven may be like someday. It is a privilege to be able to worship with each of you. If I haven't had a chance to meet you yet, my name is Josh. I get to serve as one of the pastors here on staff at Heritage. And before we really get going into what we're going to talk about today, I want to just refer back to last week briefly, because based on the feedback that we've received over the course of the last week from Pastor Brian's sermon on overcoming loneliness, it would seem that it has struck a chord with our church body. There have just been a number of you who have just kind of said, hey, thanks for dealing with that. I've never even heard that dealt with before in a church setting. And so 2 invitations for you out of that. One is, if you weren't able to be here last week, you haven't seen the message yet, go check out one of the avenues, whether it's on Facebook or YouTube or on our website, and go watch that message. It's a great message just talking about how to push through seasons of loneliness. The second invitation that I would have for you is we really want to be about community here at Heritage. So I think we've got a graphic that we're going to put up on the screen, a QR code for some group investments that we have, some open groups. I don't see it yet, but hopefully it'll come. We're wanting a QR code to give to you where you can kind of take a picture of this and it'll link you to all of our open groups, but it's not happening. Oh, there it is. Yes, just in the last the nick of time. But we want you to know that if you are in a season of loneliness, one of the more helpful things to do is to find a community to plug into and invest with, and even a community that you can love on and have them love on you. And so this will take you to a website that has all of our currently open groups in it, and just as a resource for you, do what you want with it, but we just want to make sure to make those things available and open to you. So those are a couple of things from last week. This week, though, I am excited because we get to launch into a brand new teaching series. It's going to be pretty much a summer-long teaching series where we are looking at the Old Testament book of Ecclesiastes. And Pastor Brian has really designed this series to be a verse-by-verse examination that will go through the entirety of the book. And so our responsibility today is to look at chapters 1 and 2, and we'll do a lot of verse by verse. We won't get to everything in those first 2 chapters, but really for the most part, for the rest of the summer, we'll be going verse by verse through the entirety of the book. The goal is that you would leave each week knowing exactly what the author intended when they wrote those words originally, but also to leave you with some application, to leave you with maybe some reflection questions to wrestle with that you can spend some time with the Lord on and start to apply certain things to your own heart and your own life. So that's the direction that we're heading today and for the rest of the summer. Now, right up front, I want to talk to us, before I even get into the verse by verse, I want to talk to us a little bit about the literary style of Ecclesiastes. But before I even do that, I want to make sure we're tracking on something. The Bible is made up of 66 books written over the course of many years, written by many different authors, and really those authors utilize a number of different literary styles. Now, I bring up literary styles because when you deal with each different style, it requires you to look through a different set of glasses to interpret the scriptures well. And some of you are like, Josh, this is not English class, all right? Like, let go of the literary style stuff. Bear with me, because here's the deal. Most of us understand this to be true, and I'm going to give some examples, but a lot of us don't think about this in terms of how to interact with the scriptures. For example, when you read a history textbook in like a school setting, it's going to be different than the way that you read and interact with a book of poetry. You're just going to read those differently. You're going to understand that you need to read those differently to get the original intent out of the words. The way that you read a letter from a family member is going to be different than the way that you engage with, say, a sci-fi fantasy novel like Star Wars. I don't know anything about that, but you know, something like that. You're going to interact with each of those pieces of literature in a slightly different way. And friends, the same is true of the scriptures. And we just have to understand it. For instance, you should approach the lyrical poetry found in the Psalms a little bit differently, or a lot differently, than the way that you would approach a letter written by the Apostle Paul to a specific church in a specific location in a specific time. You should approach the historical narratives found in the Old Testament, like 1st and 2nd Chronicles and 1st and 2nd Kings. You need to approach those differently than the way that you would read the prophets or a book of Apocalypse like Revelation. You need to read those things differently, or it's going to lead to some really devastating interpretations. I want us to understand where Ecclesiastes fits into all of this. It has been classified as wisdom literature. And it typically gets grouped with 4 other books of the Old Testament. We're thinking like Psalms and Proverbs and Song of Songs and Job and then Ecclesiastes. All would be considered wisdom literature. I remember back when, this was decades ago now, but I was taking some undergrad classes around wisdom literature, and one of my favorite Bible professors, his name is Dr. Stephen Lennox. He's a Wesleyan scholar and just one of my favorite Bible professors. He left me with an important lesson on how to engage properly with wisdom literature. He encouraged us to understand that when we approach wisdom literature, we do so from a principle approach, not a promise approach. In other words, wisdom literature exists to help us understand best practices for living, But there are no guarantees in this, and we should not read this as guarantees. For instance, one of the more famous proverbs, in fact, it's something that I mentioned here at Rock Island a couple of weeks ago for child dedication. One of the more famous proverbs goes like this: train up a child in the way he should go, and even when he is old, he will not depart from it. Well, that's a principle, friends. That's a best practice. Like, if you were to put this way next to a way where you don't tell your kids about, you don't tell anything to your kids about Jesus, there's a best practice. You're going to get better results doing it the way that the Proverbs communicate to you. But please don't read this as a promise, because that's not how wisdom literature operates. And here's where this can go sideways quickly. If you read that statement about raising your kids in Proverbs as a literal promise, like if you raise them right, this is what will happen. There's only one viable way to interpret that event when your kids decide not to follow in the path of faith. And that's that it rests on you. You screwed up somewhere along the way. So many parents over the course of my ministry career have sat with me, looked at that particular verse, looked at it as a promise, and just wore so much shame and regret. And they needed to really just look at that as a best practice. Like, you trained up your children in the way that they should go. Good job. You did everything that you could do, but there's a certain point where you have to release your kids. The very best readers and interpreters of the scriptures have a good sense of the literary style with which they're engaging. Now, if you're interested in this conversation, you want to dig a little bit more into this, there is a book that we're gonna throw it up on the screen, hopefully. But there's a book that I would love to recommend to you. This is not an easy read, but it's called How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about this book is that each chapter, towards the end of the second half of the book, they take the literary styles of all of the scriptures that are found, and they give you great handholds for how to interpret, how to read, things that you need to be looking out for, and it's just a great resource. I don't think it's something that you're going to be able to read in like 2 days unless you're a very special person, but to sit with it for a couple of months and to really dig in, this is a great resource. So use it if you want. If not, just ignore that I talked about it, and let me move on to 2 other points of introduction, both of them much quicker than the first, and then we're going to start getting into the verse by verse. The first thing I want to say is we should deal with this word Ecclesiastes. Like, it's kind of a strange word, and I noticed this week I really struggled to spell it. My word processing, like the red flag, Google Docs just red flagged me all week. I wanted to put 2 S's in there. There's 3 actually. So it's just an interesting word, and it literally means, it's derived from a Hebrew word, and it literally means someone speaking before an assembly. So this Hebrew word was often used as a label for preacher or for the teacher, which will make sense. Once we dive into this today, you're going to see the word teacher come up several times. In fact, if you have your Bibles, I'd go ahead and just invite you to open them up. Click there, turn there. We're going to be starting in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, and we're going to be working from chapter 1 all the way through the first 2 chapters of this book. Let me start with verse 1, and then I'll give our final point of introduction. These are the words of the teacher, King David's son, who ruled in Jerusalem. Now, this sets the stage for us, okay? The book has been written by one who has gathered an assembly, a preacher or a teacher. He has gathered this assembly for the purpose of passing along wisdom and observation and best practices. And so what follows next is just a litany of life experiences. There's all sorts of things that we're going to encounter through the book of Ecclesiastes. Even later in the book, we'll get into some short proverb-type statements that we'll be able to interact with. But the word Ecclesiastes literally describes what is going to happen throughout the rest of the book. A teacher is about ready to pass along wisdom to a group of people. Now, one other note here. Jewish and early church thinkers really have King Solomon as the author of this particular book. It's like any other book of the scriptures. If you read some of the commentaries out there, there's going to be some debate on who is the real author. But really, Pastor Brian and myself and some of the other communicators, we are really operating this summer under the mindset and with Christian tradition that Solomon is the author of this text. So I just want to highlight that and state that up front before we dive into it. So let's get into it. Let's look at what Solomon has to say, what he's trying to communicate. We're going to pick up verses 2 through 4. We're going to get a sense very quickly of the tone that we're going to find in the text that we're going to be looking at together. Here we go. Verse 2, everything is meaningless. Okay, let's go home. We're good? Okay? We'll just know. We're going to keep going. I don't know that the news gets better, though. Let me just say that. Everything is meaningless, says the teacher. Completely meaningless. What do people get for all of their hard work under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth never changes. We're off to a really encouraging start here. This is great. I don't know, you remember like the early 2000s, SNL had a character called Debbie Downer. You remember her? I don't know if we have a picture of her or not, but I wanted to put a picture of her next to every point that we make today, because that is the tone, this Debbie Downer type of thing. Yes, they got it in. We didn't have it last night, but so here is Solomon, okay? And he is someone who has tasted everything that the world has to offer. And he's starting with honesty here. Without meaning, without purpose, without God giving the context for who we are, for our identity, without God giving us clarity on all of those things, the truth is that life is pointless. If you're taking notes, this is when you start. You've got like 8 things to fill in today. It's going to be great. Life is pointless. Solomon continues. The sun rises and the sun sets, then hurries around to rise again. The wind blows south and turns north. Around and around it goes, blowing in circles. Rivers run into the sea, but the sea is never full. Then the water returns again to the rivers and flows out again to the sea. Everything is wearisome beyond description. Solomon is descriptively telling us that without meaning and purpose and God setting the context, life is just flat out tiring. It's exhausting. But he's not done. Picking back up in verse 8, he says, no matter how much we see, we are never satisfied. No matter how much we hear, we are not content. Without meaning and without purpose, we learn that life is disheartening. I might even add the word unsatisfying or unfulfilling, maybe even adding the word empty here. But he's not done. Rounding out this first section of content, Solomon actually just piles on a little bit more. And he says, history merely repeats itself. It has all been done before. Nothing under the sun is truly new. Sometimes people say, here's something new, but actually it's old. Nothing is ever truly new. We don't remember what happened in the past, and in future generations, no one will remember what we are doing now. Solomon is saying, without meaning, without purpose, without God setting the context, life is repetitive, and it's repetitive in an exhausting way. Solomon's saying, look, we do the same things all the time. We wake up at the same time. We do the same morning routine. We work. Many of us work jobs that have some repetition built into it. Then we go home. We go to bed. We wake up. We do it again. And then Solomon this is a heartbreaking part of this whole litany that he gives us. But what's worse is in 2 to 3 generations, no one will know anything about anything that we did or did not do. Solomon he's not very encouraging here. In fact, I personally would not recommend starting any book this way. I would not recommend starting any movie this way. But I appreciate the honesty. And I appreciate that he is scratching at an itch that we all have. He is scratching at an itch that's been nagging us as humans for as long as there have been humans. Because at some point in our life, we will all engage with some of those bigger questions. What am I here for? What does this all mean? What do I contribute to this world? How will I be remembered? What is my legacy? All of the big questions of existence. And I appreciate that Solomon is willing to talk plainly about how difficult life is to understand when God is not setting the context of our meaning and our purpose. But then what he does next is helpful. But I should warn you, the tone does not let up. He is not letting us off the hook today. Debbie Downer Solomon, he's still in full effect. But what Solomon does next is he helps us identify the ways in which we as humans have historically attempted to find meaning and purpose. He helps us to understand that outside the context that God provides, none of these common ways that we're going to talk about today, they really hold any meaning or any purpose or any lasting satisfaction. So we're going to pick back up in verse 12. Here's what he writes. He says, I, the teacher, the king of Israel, I lived in Jerusalem. I was king of Israel, and I lived in Jerusalem. I devoted myself to search for understanding and to explore by wisdom everything being done under heaven. And I soon discovered that God has dealt a tragic existence to the human race. I observed everything going on under the sun, and really, it is all meaningless. And here's a phrase that you'll hear again and again through Solomon's writing. Like chasing the wind. What is wrong cannot be made right. What is missing cannot be recovered. I said to myself, look, I am wiser than any of the kings who ruled in Jerusalem before me. I have greater wisdom and knowledge than any of them. So I set out to learn everything from wisdom to madness and folly, but I learned firsthand that pursuing all of this is like chasing the wind. The greater my wisdom, the greater my grief. To increase knowledge only increases sorrow. And what Solomon is communicating to us here is that intelligence alone does not bring fulfillment. Education alone does not bring fulfillment. Even wisdom alone does not bring fulfillment. Now, we're not going to have time to read this, but if you look further in chapter 2, verses 12 through 17, he continues to pile on here. He continues with, look, the accumulation of wisdom and knowledge, those things, that does not bring lasting fulfillment. In fact, he uses that chasing the wind thing several times. It's elusive. It's impossible to pin down. And he just wants to illustrate this in a visual that we will understand. But then he picks back up. Chapter 2, verse 1. I said to myself, come on, let's try pleasure. Let's look for the good things in life. But I found that this too was meaningless. So I said, laughter is silly. What good does it do to seek pleasure? After much thought, I decided to cheer myself with wine. And while still seeking wisdom, I clutched at foolishness. In this way, I tried to experience the only happiness most people find during their brief life in this world. And here, friends, we're reminded that pleasure alone does not bring fulfillment. Now, it's probably worth stopping here just for a second to highlight something, because we just got out of this really great and powerful Overcomer series. Over the last couple of weeks, we've been looking at some pretty difficult topics. We've looked at trauma, we've looked at failure, we looked at grief, we've looked at several of these things. These are traditional points of pain and fracture in our lives. And as I was processing through this kind of the pleasure piece of things, so often we will indulge in some of these pleasure-based rhythms in order to cope with the fractures that we have in our life. We kind of drown it out or tone it out or try to bury it by indulging in food or drink or sex or spending money or substance abuse or chasing experiences. We will overindulge in those things in order to help us cope with the big fractures that are buried deep into our lives. But we will find all of this out. Pleasure may satisfy for a moment or maybe for the course of a meal or something like that, but the same black hole of restlessness and unfulfillment will eventually just come charging back, and the residue of whatever it is that we're trying to ignore or bury or dodge in the fractures in us, those things will tempt us to just take bigger and bigger hits of pleasure in order to cope. And in Solomon's language, what happens here is we are dealing with a bunch of chasing the wind types of activities. If pleasure is what we're going to without the context of God, it is like chasing the wind. Solomon's not done. I'm sorry. Verse 4. I also tried to find meaning by building huge homes for myself and by planting beautiful vineyards. I made gardens and parks, filling them with all kinds of fruit trees. I built reservoirs to collect the water to irrigate my many flourishing groves. I bought slaves, both men and women, and others were born into my household. I owned large herds and flocks, more than any of the kings who had lived in Jerusalem before me. I collected sums of silver and gold, the treasure of many kings and provinces. I hired wonderful singers, both men and women. I had many beautiful concubines. I had everything a man could desire. Now, he's in the middle of a thought here, but we need to stop and say that money alone does not bring fulfillment. Possessions alone do not bring fulfillment. Sadly, having the most Star Wars toys does not bring fulfillment. Having the biggest house, having the fastest car, having the biggest savings account, none of those things will bring lasting fulfillment. But Solomon is not done with us yet. He is not letting us off the hook. We pick up in verse 9, and he just goes on. He keeps piling on. So I become greater than all who had lived in Jerusalem before me, and my wisdom never failed me. Anything I wanted, I would take. I denied myself no pleasure. I even found great pleasure in hard work, a reward for all my labors. But as I looked at everything I had worked so hard to accomplish, it was all so meaningless, like chasing the wind. There was nothing really worthwhile anywhere. And Solomon lets us know that even success alone does not bring fulfillment. And if you read further on, and I think you get the point, so we're going to kind of draw a line here, but if you read further on into verses 18 through 25, you're going to get more of the same about work and legacy even. He gets back into food and drink. All of those things, says Solomon, are meaningless. They're like chasing the wind. Now, I know that Solomon is not, he's no Dr. Feelgood in this passage. I get that. But I do appreciate his candor. Now, the odd thing is, when you look just solely at chapters 1 and 2, he just leaves us hanging. There is no pat on the back, it's going to be right. Like, there is no letting us off the hook. There is no, the tone, the note of despair that is through the entirety of these first 2 chapters. There is never a point where he, like, dims that down and brings up hope. Like, that's just nothing that he does. And so it is certainly uncomfortable to sit in for any length of time. I'm uncomfortable in it. My guess is that you're wondering why you came to church today. Like, I get that. But I want us to understand, it does, being in this tone of despair, it does help raise some important questions that we need to wrestle with. Even though Solomon doesn't let us off the hook, I feel like I'm going to try a little bit. I'm going to try to pat you on the back before we go. And I want to try to bring some resolution today. And I want to start by pointing out, it's probably a quote that if you've been around the Christian block a couple of times, you've probably seen this shared before. But there's a quote from St. Augustine that I just love. It's actually in the form of a prayer. And he says, "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." Irish rock band U2, they have a song where they use the phrase, "looking to fill that God-shaped hole." Each of us have been designed in such a way that for us to experience lasting fulfillment and purpose and joy, it has to come in partnership with Jesus. It has to come in relationship with Jesus. We each have a God-shaped hole in our life that can only be filled by Him. So my encouragement to you today, my friends, is to make sure that you are starting and ending with Jesus, because He makes sense of everything. Everything flows out of Him. Everything makes sense in Him. And once you've resolved that question in your heart, then I would urge you to begin to reflect, to begin to reflect and then release. Now, here's what I mean by that. I am a very visual person, so I tend to look in images and I see things that just kind of connect back to stuff that I'm chomping on internally. And I was taking a walk this week with my wife, Melissa, in our neighborhood. We kind of have we walk around the block, and there we ran into a tree that just stopped us in our tracks. I think we have a picture of it, kind of a wide view picture that we'll have, and then a narrow view. And it might be hard to see because of the lighting and stuff, but at the top of the tree, there is no life at all. There is no life in those big branches at the top of the tree. The only life that you see is towards the base of the tree. It's almost like a little tree is growing around the big tree. And the big tree is like, it just feels like it's completely dead. It was just a very, very interesting image. And I was kind of thinking this week about how if you were to see this tree in the winter, and you didn't know anything about trees, but you saw it in the winter, you would kind of think, oh man, this is going to be a beautiful tree in the summer. By the way, if this is your tree, I'm sorry, I'm not making fun of it. It is what it is. But this would be a very beautiful tree in the summer, but then summer brings flourishing, and flourishing brings the proof. And the proof is that most of the top of that tree is dead, and there's no life, and there's no flourishing. And the thought occurred to me that the various things that Solomon points out in the passage in front of us today, they are things that from a distance, they may look like sturdy ways to find purpose and meaning. You think about work, you think about pleasure and success and money and degrees, information. None of those things are inherently evil or wrong, but without God, they will not bring lasting fulfillment. They will not bring the flourishing. The proof is in the flourishing, and Solomon is telling us there is no flourishing in those pathways apart from God. The flourishing happens through Christ alone. So the question I am begging you to wrestle with in your own quiet time with the Lord is, what non-flourishing branches have you latched onto in your life to attempt to find meaning and purpose and fulfillment? What are the things that hold the most temptation for you? And I would just encourage you, sit with that this week in the Lord's presence. Spend time with him. Reflect on the question. And then as he brings those things to light in your soul, confess and release and hand those things over to the Lord. And then do what St. Augustine says, rest your soul in Jesus. Now, there's a second thing I want to talk about in terms of application. This is more of a broad invitation to the entire summer, to the entire series. I want to just encourage you, lean in. As we engage in the sermon series, read Ecclesiastes. Read the entirety of the book in your quiet time. Get it into your soul. With me, learn how to spell it even. It would be really great. We can do that together. Meditate on what's there. Ask the Holy Spirit to reveal and nudge and guide you in all of this. Friends, allow the Word of God to be a shaping force in your life as we engage in this together. I also want to mention something that is very, very practical, all right? So just bear with me, but I think it's important. We have been talking over the last month about this resource that we've just recently subscribed to at Heritage. It's called Right Now Media. It's sort of like the Christian Netflix. There's just study upon study on this service. And if you call Heritage your home, you can have access to Right Now Media for free. It will cost you nothing. If you have not figured out a way to get signed into that, contact the church. We will help you do that. But I want you to know that when you go under the umbrella of Heritage, on the front page, there's a badge up at the top that has our logo and our name. And if you click on that, it will go to a landing page that we as a staff get to curate. Pastor Michaela's put a lot of time into this, creating channels for different groups of people. And one of the channels that we have is a sermon resource channel. It's a channel where we have gathered a few resources that we've found on Right Now Media that have to do with Ecclesiastes, and even a couple that have to do with wisdom literature as a whole. And we would say, engage with that. Use that as a supplement to what we're doing this summer. Dive in. If you're a group leader, it might be something to consider with your group to dive into one of these studies as a supplement while we're doing this on weekends. Like, just dive into what's in front of you. We really want you to engage with the text, engage with the scriptures, and allow it to be a shaping force in your life this summer and beyond. And then the last thing I would mention is, let's just make sure that we're continually inviting Jesus into the conversations that we're having. That things should start and end with him. That remember that he alone makes sense of everything that we interact with in our lives. And so today we really felt like it was a great way to not only launch a new series, but to seal these first 2 chapters of Ecclesiastes with a very Jesus-focused practice. And that is really to invite all of you to the table that Jesus established for us through the sacrament of communion. Hopefully when you walked in, you received the elements. If you didn't, maybe raise your hand and we can have host team members if you can help people out who don't have it. But I would encourage you to get those elements out. And if the worship, we've got a couple of hands if some host team members can. Yeah, we've got some stuff back there. And the worship team, if you guys want to come out and just kind of get set and get ready and even partake in communion with us, you can. But I would invite you, go ahead and get those elements out, start working on those lids, because honestly, it's easier to spell Ecclesiastes than it is to operate these lids sometimes. But let's get these ready. And as you're getting these ready and holding these in front of you, I want to prayerfully read a passage of scripture over you as we get ready to receive the elements. I think we've got pretty much everybody covered now. So allow these words from Paul to wash over you. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 23. For I pass on to you what I received from the Lord himself. On the night when he was betrayed, the Lord Jesus took some bread and gave thanks to God for it. Then he broke it in pieces and said, "This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." So church, in turn, I would invite you to receive the bread. And as you receive it, remember that it is through his broken body that you are made whole and that you are given purpose. Let's partake together. In the same way, Jesus took the cup of wine after supper, saying, "This cup is the new covenant between God and his people, an agreement confirmed with my blood. Do this in remembrance of me as often as you drink it." And so, friends, I would now invite you to receive the juice, and as you do so, remember that through his shed blood, you are given access to freedom, to forgiveness, and to flourishing. Let's pray. Lord, I thank you for these elements, the reminders that we are given, that it is through your life and death and life again, your resurrection, that so much purpose and meaning is infused into who we are, that it is only through the context of your life and death and resurrection that things begin to make sense. And we talked about the courage to let go of some of those pathways, some of those branches that are unfulfilling and malnourished. But we recognize that when we start and end with you, some of those things, like work, like pleasure, like some of the other things that we talked about, education, those things are not in and of themselves bad, and set in the context with you. Even those things are given meaning and purpose because you infuse your meaning and purpose into those things. So help us to have the courage to identify the places where we are turning to those things for meaning outside the context of how you provide meaning for us. And help us to reconcile all of that stuff back together and to submit to your lordship and your authority in our lives. Lord, we thank you so much for who you are. We love you, We're desperately thankful that you loved us first. And we pray all of these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Brothers and sisters, we're going to praise Jesus who came and will come again. The one who gives us purpose so we are no longer chasing the wind. Let's lift him up today.
Well, hey, I just want to thank you for watching today and being part of our service as we've worshiped together, declaring who God is through song, through gathering around the scripture and lifting each other up in prayer. It was just a powerful time to watch this service together and engage with it in that way. Listen, we have a passion and desire at Heritage Church to help you in your journey wherever you are. Maybe for some of you, it's coming to a physical location and finding greater community in that way. Maybe for some of you, you're looking for different ways to connect missionally and give of your time in that way as well. Listen, you can go to heritageqc.com at any point and find greater connection in so many different avenues, and we would love for you to do that. Have a great day. We'll see you all again next week.